Hello, this is a video tutorial on how to set up transactional replication from SQL Server to an Azure SQL database. My name is Matt Philippi. You can find me on LinkedIn, CPA and Business Intelligence Architect. Feel free to reach out and connect with me there. I'm also on YouTube. I have my channel, and then on Tableau Public. If you like this video, I welcome you to please subscribe to my channel. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a database on SQL Server, and in this case that database will be on an Azure virtual machine. We will set it up as a publisher and a distributor, and then we will set up transactional replication to a subscriber on an Azure SQL database. We'll then set up a read-only user, a fixed database role assigned to that user, DB data reader role, and then I will show you in this video how to connect to Excel, but you could just as easily connect to Power BI or Tableau or any other analytics product. Why set up transactional replication from SQL Server to Azure SQL Database? Well, we are primarily interested in operational reporting and analytic workloads. So one reason would be to reduce the workload on the transactional database, the physical server, OS, SQL Server instance, and the database. We can custom configure a separate analytics database. There's no need to copy all the objects from your transactional database, only what you need for reporting and analytics. With this new database, we'll create the source data or the destination database. So you'll be able to create new database objects. So it's different than a read-only replica where everything is copied only and you can't create new objects. Of course, we can custom configure user permissions on our analytical database, meaning just use read-only permissions. Operational reporting, so asynchronous replication with 4 to 6 second latency. So this isn't, data warehouses that are updated daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. This is basically an exact copy of your data with about 4 to 6 seconds of latency. Azure SQL Database is a managed service, and finally with Azure SQL Database you get transparent data encryption automatically. The other reason we would use it is because of data migration, but what we're primarily interested in is operational reporting and analytic workloads. If you're going to do this, I strongly recommend that you go out to Replication to Azure SQL Database and look at this page here, especially if you're going to put this into production. My typical boilerplate here, I say we're going to talk about cost and security, but this demo doesn't necessarily include security best practices and cost analysis. Security and cost is your responsibility to understand. 26 steps. And at the very end here, we have a step on how to delete your resource group. We're going to use resource groups. So if you get stuck anyway at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, whatever, you can always go in and delete your resource group and it will delete all resources that you deployed and stop getting charged. So that's step 26, but you can do this at any time. So we'll go back to the beginning here, and step 1 will be to launch SQL Server on an Azure VM. Step 2 will remote desktop into that server. 3, we got to fix an error. Interestingly, these images that I've been using come up with an error. Cannot connect to WMI provider, so we'll go to the command line and enter this command in. Then we will configure the SQL Server agent. Then we will connect to our instance. Then we're going to create a database. We'll create a table with a couple columns, including a primary key. So when you do replication, the table, at least at a minimum, needs a primary key. We're going to insert some data. We're going to create a publication out of that database. We will then launch Azure SQL Database and create a database called subscriber-db. We will adjust our virtual network that we launched our SQL Server VM into in step 1 so that we can attach our Azure SQL Database to that virtual network and the subnet. Then we'll adjust our firewalls to actually attach it, what we did in step 11 here. We will adjust our firewalls. Then we're going to connect to our subscriber DB on Azure SQL Database. We're going to create a subscription for that. Then we'll check the snapshot agent to make sure that the snapshot on our publisher instance or our publisher database finished. We'll check our log reader to see if there's any transactions that haven't been copied. Then we'll log back into we'll run a query, on our subscriber destination database to see that the transactional replication is working. We'll insert a record into the publisher database. Then we'll check to see that transaction was replicated to the subscriber. We'll take a look at the replication monitor to see what the performance and the latency is like. Then we're going to create a login on our subscriber database, our analytics database. We'll create a user for that login. We'll add read-only permissions, and then we will adjust our firewall so that I can log into Excel from my local desktop and then connect and authenticate to the subscriber database. And then finally at the end, as I said, we will clean up the resource group. We will delete the entire resource group and stop getting charged, and you can do this at any point. Step 1, we are going to launch an Azure VM using an image that has a free license of SQL Server 2016 Developer Edition. We are going to create a resource group where we will keep all of our resources for this tutorial, and at any point you can delete anything that you launch and stop getting charged by just deleting the entire resource group. As part of this, we'll create a virtual network and a subnet in that network, and we will, for this Azure virtual machine, we will open up port 3389 so we can RDP into there. So go ahead and log into Azure. I will do that, and I'll pause the video as I do that. Okay, I'm now logged in here on the dashboard. Go to home here, and then so create resource, and then you can type in SQL Server 2016 Developer SP2, hit enter. There it is, free license, SQL Server SP Developer on Windows Server 2016. So we'll click that. Deployment model, resource manager, create. Okay, I'm going to call this publisher VM. Okay, username. And you are going to want to remember these passwords, of course, because we will be using them for RDP. Subscription pay-as-you-go. I'm going to create a new resource group called transactional replication. Everything that I deploy on Azure for this project will go against that. Very important here, West US2 is what I'm going to use here. So we want to keep track of our location. Virtual machine. I think we can get away with 16 gigabytes of RAM when we start up here. So I'm going to do that. Select. Okay, there's some important stuff here. Availability zone. You don't really need to select it, but I do it out of habit. Just keeping track of the availability zones for the locations. Okay, important here. No need to change anything, but yes, we'll just follow these defaults, which will create a virtual network that our Azure VM will get deployed into, and a subnet. I'm not going to go into this, but this virtual network will be deployed with the /24, so technically we'll only be able to put one subnet in there. Not a big deal for this tutorial. Public IP address, yes. Network security group, okay. Select public inbound ports. So we are going to RDP into this machine. This is Windows Server, so we'll use RDP. Okay, then I check that. Enable auto shutdown. Hey, I like to do this when I'm just practicing testing things, just in case I forget. I'll pick my location here, so I don't shut it down while I'm doing this video here. Okay, 8 a.m. Notification for shutdown, no. Okay, everything's okay here. Okay, next, SQL Server settings. Again, really important here. So we're just going to keep this private. No need to open it up to the public. SQL Server authentication, very important here. Yes, we need to enable this. Matt, this will just copy over what I use for the Azure VM or the instance. And then everything else looks good here. Don't change this, don't change this, don't change this. No need for our services. So the key here is enable SQL authentication. And then remember, this is the same that I used in before, but you're going to want to remember this so we can get into the instance. Okay? 18 cents an hour. Good enough for this tutorial. And then I will create. And then as it is deploying, I will time this. And then I'll pause. Okay, good news. About 10 minutes and it's configured. How do I know? Well, I go up to the notification button here and it told me that my deployment was succeeded. It took 10 minutes. And if you ask me, that's pretty good. If you have any experience with installing Windows Server and SQL Server by yourself, it takes a lot longer than 10 minutes. So we got a fully operational version of Windows 2016 and SQL Server 2016 in 10 minutes on these images. So pretty powerful. One other thing. So I'm going to unclick that. I am going to go over to resource group and then we'll take a look exactly what was deployed here. Remember we called a resource group called transactional replication. And then you can see in here the resources that were deployed. Azure VM, the disks, the OS disk, and then the data disk where SQL Server, the SQL Server will be on. The network interface, the IP, network security group, and then the virtual network and a storage account. So 10 minutes to get all of that done. That is the cloud. Step 2, we are going to remote desktop into the Azure VM. And real quickly here, I am using Windows 10, which comes with remote desktop. However, in the event that small chance that you're using a Mac, you can go out and get started with remote desktop on Mac, and you'll find a link here with instructions on how to do this from a Mac. So the point here is we're trying to get into a Windows Server 2016, and we will use remote desktop to do that. So I will go back to my Azure portal, and then I left off here at resource group, but you can always go back to resource group here. And then go to transactional replication. And then the Azure Publisher VM. Okay, this can get kind of a little tricky here, but so we're in our Azure VM. So one thing you can do is you can connect. So remember when we launched the VM, we put in a user and a password. So I will do this here. I'm going to download the RDP file, which will, and then open. And sometimes this works perfectly, sometimes it doesn't. Let's see what happens here. I'm going to change this to that username and password that I did. I'm going to use a different account here, and then I'll put in that username and password. And then hit OK. I'm going to hit yes. And then voila, we're in. And maybe the machine is still starting to configure. So as soon as I get to the splash screen, I will pause it. There we go. Step 3, I'm going to start by saying that this is a step specific to the images out on Azure for the free SQL Server licenses for SQL Server 2016. So you may not have to do this, but I tried several of the images with free licenses for SQL Server 2016, and believe it or not, I got an error message when I tried to run the configuration manager. So this is mandatory. So we're going to go in and then run this command on the command line, and then that will allow us to use SQL Server configuration manager. So if you remember, we left off on the last step in RDP. And then we're on the splash screen, Server Manager. So I'm going to say no. I'm going to click out of the Server Manager. I'm going to go down here to this button, SQL Server 2017. SQL Server, actually, you know what, I'm going to do something real quick here. I'm just going to right click on that and say, pin this to the taskbar so I have it down here. Probably won't need this again, but that's just a habit I have. So I'm going to click on SQL Server 2017 Configuration Manager. And guess what? I get this WMI invalid namespace error. And then, so in order to fix this, I got to go OK. And then I actually have this here, so I'm just going to copy this right here. Actually, I'm going to copy this right here. Right here. This is kind of crazy. I know. Got to do this. So I'm going to go back into my RDP. Okay. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to go to CMD. Command prompt. And I'm going to paste that in here. So the important thing here is just specific to this, it is 140. So that's because we're using SQL Server 2016. If you in fact get this error and you have another version like 2014 or 12, it'd be like 130 or 120 or something like that. So this 140 is specific to SQL Server 2016. So go back to RDP. So I'm on my VM here. I have the command prompt open and I'm just going to paste this in here. Oh, that didn't work. Let me try that again. Okay, I'm going to copy this. It's in quotes here because there's spaces in here. If you don't have the quotes, then it will read it as, try to read it as separate commands, which it's not. There we go. Okay, storing data in the repository. Now if I go back to the configuration manager, it opens. Good news. Step 4. We're going to configure the SQL Server agent, which is what transactional replication uses to do the replication on SQL Server. So a couple key things here. We want it to be running. We want it to be automatic in start mode. And then the third one is not a security best practice, but is okay for this tutorial, where we're going to change it to local systems so that SQL Server can get down to the OS level and do what it needs to do. So we're going to be back in RDP here. And if you remember, we just opened the SQL Server Configuration Manager. And I'm going to go to SQL Services here. And then at the bottom is SQL Server Agent. I'm going to double click on that. And then I will use built-in account local system. Again, that is not a security best practice, but okay for this tutorial. I'm going to hit apply. Okay. And then I'm going to hit start. Okay. Local system, start. And I'm going to click out of here. And then actually I'm going to go up and highlight SQL Server Agent line. I'm going to put properties. I could have done this before. Service, automatic, apply. There you go. So running, automatic, local system, SQL Server Agent. Step 5, we're going to connect to Publisher DB instance via SQL Server Management Studio. So at this step, the key here is there's a server name called Publisher VM that we set up when we launched Azure SQL Server on the Azure VM. The cool thing here is we already have a Windows authentication account. Of course, this is not on a domain. This is just specific to the Windows server. And we're going to connect to this instance on SQL Server. So we're going to go back to RDP. We left off here at the SQL Server Configuration Manager. I'm going to click out of there. I'm going to go, let me clean this up too. I will go down here, SQL Server Tools. Then you can see SQL Server Management Studio there. I'm going to do the right click, more, pin to taskbar, because that's how I like to just keep it accessible down here. You can launch it here or here. I'll just launch it here. And it takes a couple seconds to launch. So So actually I will pause it while it does that. Probably take 20-30 seconds to get ready. Okay, great. Yeah, it took about 30 seconds. So this pops up here. So the cool thing is locally, the server is local here. And then these are the credentials I created when I created the Azure VM. So I'm just going to connect. There. I don't know why I had to click it twice. There. Now we can see our instance. There shouldn't be any databases in here, but we are logged in. Step 6, we just logged into the instance. Now we're going to create a database called Publisher. So we want to go to RDP. So we were just in here. We left off at this Publisher VM instance, and now we need a database because we don't see any databases here, right? So the first thing you're going to do is highlight Publisher VM, hit New Query right here. Okay, and then it's pretty simple. Create database publisher, and you don't necessarily need to know this, but you will default to the master. That's where you create the databases. So create database publisher. You have two options here. You can create execute, or you can press F5. I'm going to create execute. Command completed successfully. If I go back here to Publisher VM and then I click this refresh button, it will show me that I have a database. Step 7, now that we have a database, we're going to create an object called a table, and to do that, go back into RDP here. Okay, so we just created a database. Now I'm going to highlight on here, and then I'm going to hit New Query. Okay, and you'll see that it says Publisher up here. Now here's something you can do that you can actually skip that step, but I'm going to put use Publisher. Okay. Okay, and you don't necessarily need to do this because you're already in Publisher here, but I'll do it anyway. And then create table employee, and then we're going to create a column called ID, which will be an int primary key. So super important here. You should, generally speaking, always have a primary key anyway, but transactional replication will not work for objects or tables without a primary key. And then we'll create a second column called first name underscore name varchar 30 ::. That looks good. So again, I can either hit execute or I can press F5, and then this will run. Command completed successfully. So I can click the refresh button here, click on the publisher database, click on table, and you'll see an employee table right here. Step 8, we just created a database object, a table called employee. Now we're going to put some data into that table. So we're going to insert into employee one record, and then we will do a select star on that table to make sure that that record got inserted in there. So again, back to RDP here. We just finished with this statement right here. So I'm just going to go down a couple lines here. It's important here. I'm not going to do use publisher this side. We're in publisher already. So I'm going to do insert into employee values 1. So that's the ID. The first column is int ID. Then I'm going to do single quotes bill for the second column. And then I will just highlight this and then hit execute. One row affected. So then I can just do select star on employee. Strange. Okay. Sorry. And select star from employee. Select star from employee. Highlight that. And then you can see ID, first name, Bill. Step 9, we have a database with a table and then some data in that table. Now it's time to create the publication wizard. Publication. So this will be the source of data, and then later on we'll create some destinations to receive that data. So new publication, so we'll go into replication, right click, new publication, and then we'll use the new publication wizard, and I'll create a publication called Publisher DB. So back into RDP here. So now I can go down to, so we're in Publisher VM. I can go down to replication. I can go local publications, highlight that, then I'll right click and I'll say a new publication. Yes, let's do the publication wizard. This is critical. So for Azure SQL Database to use that as replication, you have to do this, or I'm sorry, scratch that. Just ignore what I just said there, but Publisher will act as its own distributor in this case. So you could actually set up a second instance to use the distributor, but we're just going to do this. Publisher VM will act as its own distributor. Next. Okay, no changes here. We're going to use the Publisher database. Critical here, transactional publication. I believe you cannot use snapshot peer-to-peer or merge using Azure SQL Database as the subscriber. Only transactional replication will work. Next. So I'm going to save all the tables here, which we only have one. And I'll click Next. And I'll click Next again. And then create a snapshot immediately. Schedule the snapshot agent to run at the following times. Actually, we'll just do this one. Create a snapshot immediately. Next. And then the security settings. So we'll just take a quick look at that. I'll use this, run under the SQL Server agent account. And then by impersonating the process account, hit OK. Hit Next. Next. I will call this Publisher DB. And then I'll hit Finish. It will run through these steps, probably take about 30 seconds. I'll pause it while it does that. Or maybe I won't pause it. We'll just see how long it takes here. Okay, success, success, success. Close. And you can go back and refresh here. Go back to local publications, and then there. Publisher DB is available as a publisher. Step 10, we're ready to set up our reporting or our analytics database. This will be the destination for the publisher that we just set up in the previous step. The important part is we're going to use SQL Database. This is a managed service from Azure. We'll call this subscriber-db, and then the super important part here is this needs to be in the same location that we launched our SQL Server 2016 on an Azure VM. So I use West US 2, so I'm going to use that again. I'm going to go back to Azure here. So I'm a dashboard. I'm going to create resource. You can see right here it says SQL Database. If you don't see that, you can go up here and type SQL Database, but I'm going to select SQL Database. Database name, I will call this subscriber-db. We will use the existing resource group called transactional application, blank database, server. This needs to be unique in the Azure world. So I'm going to call this subscriber-db-mat. I believe for the admin login, you can't use the name admin. You will want to remember this password, of course. The super important part that I talked about, this needs to be consistent with where we launched our Azure VM for SQL Server. I used West US 2. And then another important part, I don't like this. Uncheck this. You don't need this. So I did not allow that. Looks like my password didn't match. So I'm just going to go back and do them again real quick. Sorry, sometimes I don't make perfect videos. Obviously, okay, good. Passwords match, West US 2, uncheck this box, select. And then pricing tier, that looks good to me. S0, 10 DTUs, 250 gigabytes, and then create. And then as I like to do, I'll go to the clock so you can tell, and I will pause this video until it's done launching. You can see up here deployment in progress. Ta-da! Done! 2 minutes. Wow! The SQL Server on Azure VM was 10 minutes. Now we get a database in 2 minutes. So pretty good, amazing stuff here. You can check it out up here. Let's go to our resource group over here. Transactional replication. And right down here is the server and the subscriber DB. Very nice. 2 minutes. Doesn't have all the features that SQL Server on Azure VM does, but has a lot of them, so pretty powerful stuff. Step 11. This is super important, although it seems very mundane. We're going to go into the virtual network where our Azure VM is on, and then we're going to enable the service endpoint. And why this matters is because when our SQL Server on Azure replicates and talks to a SQL database, we want to keep that traffic confined to Azure and to our own account. So this is logically speaking. We definitely don't want it to go out over the internet in public when it's replicating. We want to keep everything within our own account, logically speaking, on Azure. So we're going to go to the virtual network. And so go over here to your resource group. Transactional replication. And then you can find your VNet right here. Then you can go down to service endpoints. Add a service endpoint. We want SQL. And so we want our Azure SQL database, which is not in the virtual network, to attach to our default subnet that we originally set up when we launched the virtual network, when we were launching our Azure VM with the SQL Server. So critical, Microsoft.SQL Server, default, add, updating, and I'll pause it here while it updates. Okay, great. So yeah, this is what it should look like. So for transactional replication VNet, we now have Microsoft.SQL subnet enabled. Step 12, another really important point following up on our virtual network service endpoint. We're going to go to the SQL Server instance for our Azure SQL database and then adjust the firewall so we can connect our Azure SQL database to the endpoint. And then that way our Azure SQL database will be attached to the virtual network and the subnet that our SQL Server on Azure VM is. So let's go back to Azure here. Okay, I'm going to go back to resource groups, transactional replication. Okay, now important here. You see this? Here's our Azure SQL database. Here's the database itself, the SQL database, but here's the server. So we want to go to the server. You can see it with the little flywheel. I named this differently. Maybe I should have called it subscriber VM -mat, but that's fine. So the little flywheel here, SQL Server. Okay. And then up here it says show firewall settings. Okay. Remember before I turn this off, I don't like that. Okay. So add existing virtual network. Okay. Pick the subscription. Okay. And then this defaulted here, transactional replication VNet. Then the default subnet. We could see in the previous step we had enabled this service endpoint. And now we're going to click OK. And then let's see here. I'll set the clock on this one. See how long this takes. And I will pause it until it's ready. Okay, that took about 10 seconds. And then now we can see here for our subscriber, DB server, firewalls, and networks, we now have attached to our service endpoint. Step 13, we are going to connect to our Azure SQL database. And instead of doing this from my laptop, I'm going to do this using the SQL Server Management Studio that we have on Azure VM, where we have our installed SQL Server instance. So I won't be doing any of this over the internet. This will all be done over Azure. So the first thing we're going to do is go out and get this endpoint right here. So we're going to want to go back to Azure. I'm going to go to my resource groups. I'm going to go to transactional replication. I'm going to go down to the SQL database here. Don't go to the SQL Server, go to the SQL database. And then up here, you're going to find the server name. This is the endpoint that I want. Hopefully that's copied. You will then go back to RDP, remote desktop. Now we're back on our Azure VM where SQL Server 2016 is installed. I'm going to go to connect, database engine. Okay, I'm going to paste that endpoint. The important part here now is we're going to be using SQL Server authentication. I will use my credentials that I set up when we launched the Azure SQL database. Connect. And there we are. We're logged in. Step 14. We are now going to create a subscription. So we're getting, again, close to the end here. This will be our destination or reporting database that we're going to set up. So there's several steps, so you're going to want to pay attention here. And we will go back into remote desktop where we just were there. And then you want to go to replication, local publications, right click on the publisher DB that we set up earlier, create new subscription, next. This is your only option for an Azure SQL database subscription. Run all agents at distributor. Add the subscriber, add a SQL Server subscriber. This should pop up if we already did this down here. So this is your endpoint for your Azure SQL database. SQL Server authentication, Matt. That's my login, and then I'll put in my password here. Connect. Okay. Important. I want to pick the subscriber database. Okay. Make sure that this first one is unchecked. Make sure the second one is checked here. Click next. Security options. Okay. Super important to pay attention here. We're going to run this under the SQL Server agent account. Again, not a best practice. By impersonating the process account. And then super important right here, use the SQL Server login for our Azure SQL database. Admin. Oh, it's not admin. Can't do that. Okay. Okay. Yep. Next. Create the subscription. So this will create the subscription here. Should take, I believe, less than 10 seconds. Success. Okay. I can close this. Then I will come over here and I will refresh. And there, you'll see the subscription. Step 15, replication should be set up and ready to go. So let's take a look at the snapshot agent. We'll do that. Let's go to our RDP here. Okay. Now I can go click on the publisher here. I can go to view snapshot agent status. Looks like one snapshot was created. So this would be a copy of my transactional database. This is the publisher database. That would be then initially copied over to our subscriber database. So we're good there. 16, let's check the log reader and see if there are any transactions that are being hung up. There shouldn't be any because we haven't done any transactions, but let's check it anyway. So we'll go back to RDP, close this out, go back to Publisher DB, click the log reader. No replicated transactions available. So far so good. Step 17, transactional replication is set up and ready to go. So let's go check our subscriber database to see if the records were copied over in there. So I'm going to go back to RDP. Okay. we are going to be working in, here's our subscriber reporting database. So let's highlight that there. Let's hit the refresh button, make sure everything's set up okay. Then I'm going to click databases. There's our subscriber database. Let's go to tables. And hey, look, there's an employee table. So I'm going to highlight the subscriber database, right click, new query, select star from employee, and let's see if that record is in there. Ah, congratulations, it is. So transactional replication is working. Step 18, time to see transactional replication in action by putting a record in our publisher database and following it through to the subscriber database. So the first thing we're going to do here is back here in RDP, back in SQL Server Management Studio. So we want to go back up to our SQL Server, our publisher database. I'm going to right click on here, new query. I'm going to use publisher. Theoretically, I shouldn't have to do this because you can see right here I'm already in the publisher database. And then I'm going to do an insert into employee. I have no idea why the IntelliSense is not working here. So just hand type everything out. I'm going to put 2. Let's do Mary. And then that should be good to go. And I'll highlight this and then execute. Okay. The next step will be select star from employee. Again, no idea why the IntelliSense is not working. Then I will execute that, and there's Mary. Step 19, which is let's verify the transaction was replicated to the subscriber. So we should see Mary. We inserted Mary up here. We should see Mary down here. So we're currently here. We want to go back down to here, highlight your subscriber DB, right click, new query. Okay, you can see we're up here in the subscriber-DB. Select star from employee, either execute or F5, and there's Mary. Looks like it was replicated. Okay, step 20, you gotta kind of be quick on this, but we can just actually look at what happened using the replication monitor. So go back up here, go back to replication, go back to publisher, right click, launch replication monitor, go to my publishers, okay, right here, click down in here, and 0 latency, so we kind of missed it, but it actually took probably about 4 to 6 seconds. But if you're quick, you can see exactly how much time it took. Step 21, time to create a login for our subscriber database, or actually the subscriber server instance in particular. And just a reminder, the whole point of this exercise is to allow people using their Excel, Power BI, or Tableau clients and to run queries against a reporting analytics database. So those queries don't ever touch the transactional database, but it's almost a real-time replication, asynchronous, 4 to 6 seconds. So we're going to set up our read-only user with the fixed database role DB data reader. So the first step is to create a login, and we'll go to RDP here, and then down here in our Azure SQL database, I will go to logins, and then I'll right-click, and I'll put new login, and then just get rid of this here. Call this new login 1, and then the password in quotes. Okay, of course you're going to want to remember this is what we're going to log into in Excel. And then the important part here is we are in the master database, so you create logins against the master database. So I'll highlight this. Actually, I don't even really need to highlight it. I could just run it, but just out of habit, I'll highlight it and then execute F5. And then down here, I will refresh, and you'll see new login 1 right there. New underscore login underscore 1. Step 22, we're going to create a user for that login. So the login allows us to authenticate against the server, and then a user attached to a login gives us permissions to a specific database. So it's important for this is we're going to give permissions to subscribers, so we want to create a user in subscriber. So let's go back here to let's go back to Management Studio here in RDP, And then the important part here is I want to switch the database here. And this is something in Azure SQL database you can't use the use. You'll get an error message. So we want to make sure that this is changed right here to subscriber DB. And then I will do create user, new user 1 for login, new login 1. I can use a telesense there in tab with default schema. We're not using any custom schemas. We can just use the default DBO. I'll add a go there, and then I will highlight this. The key part here is I'm doing it against subscriber-DB, and it should create a new user down here. Okay, I will refresh. So I just highlighted, execute F5, and then I will refresh, and there it is, new user 1 right there. Step 23, time to add read-only permissions to the user we just created. So we created a user, but it doesn't have permissions. So the whole goal of this exercise is to create a read-only role. So we're going to use the DB_data reader fixed database role. So let's go back to Management Studio. And we are still in the subscriber-DB. So I'm going to do the store procedure here. Exec, add, IntelliSense brings it up right here, role member. Okay, then DB_data reader role. Those are single quotes. New user 1, which is what we just created. Highlight that, F5 or execute. Okay, and then we can actually go to the DMVs here and check this out, system views. And then we'll see, I'm going to look up the database principles. Select 1,000 roles here. So principal ID new user 1 is principal ID 5. And then I can go down here to the, let's see here, the role members, DMV. Right click, select 1,000 rows here. So you can see 163090 has member principal 5. So let me go back here. Data reader 1639 has principal ID member 5 as a role member. So we're good. Step 24, almost there. So remember, the goal is I want to use Excel and get data and use the connections here to automate my importing of the data. Just one small problem. I'm going to be doing this from my laptop. I'm going to be doing it over the internet. And currently the firewall, there's nothing open. So I need to add my client IP for my laptop to the firewall to allow a connection over the internet. So first thing we're going to do is go back here, go to resource groups, transactional replication. And this time we're going to do the SQL Server instance, subscriber-db-mat, so SQL Server with the little flywheel right there. Click on that. Show firewall settings. Okay, really important here. I'm going to add my client IP and I'm going to save. So if you don't save it, it's not going to work. So add and then save. Updating server firewall rules. Successfully updated firewall rules for the server. So we should be good to go. I should be able to connect to Excel or using Power BI or Tableau or whatever else from my laptop. Step 25, what we've all been waiting for. We're going to connect Excel to our reporting analytics database. And the first thing we'll do is we're going to go back out to the portal Azure here. Let me go to resource groups, transactional replication. I want the SQL database here. And then I'm going to copy that. Hopefully that's copied. And then I'm going to minimize this. So I actually have Excel set up, and then I also have RDP open here. So I'm in Management Studio, and we were just here, we did all this, so it's a lot easier, I think, if you see it from this perspective. And of course, you could have copied this endpoint from right here as well. So I'm in the Data tab. I'm going to go Get Data from Database, from SQL Server Database. Okay, I'm going to put in the server, which I just copied, which is the same as this server right here. Okay, and then I want to put in the subscriber DB. Subscriber DB. Okay, and then it's going to say OK. Okay, and then important right here, database, we'll be using SQL Server authentication. And then this is a little tricky. We're actually not using a username, we're using our login. That's what you do for SQL Server, use the login. Yes, there is a user, but a user is attached to the login. The user has permissions against a specific database, but we're authenticating against the instance or the server. I'm not sure what you call it in Azure. So I'm going to go with new login 1. Put that password in. By the way, this will be long gone, so good luck if you want to try this. Password. And then connect. Okay, great. And then there's our employee table right here. So I'm going to click on that, and then you can see Bill and Mary. And then what the heck, I'll just load that into the data model. Add this to the data model. Well, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to only create a connection. And there you go. That's the result we're looking for. And so as far as this exercise goes, that's as far as I'm going to take you here. Of course, you could do lots and lots of videos on data modeling and transforming and Power Query and M and DAX and all that stuff, but I think that's good enough for this video. So that's the final for step 25. Step 26, time to clean everything up and make sure that we don't get charged. So remember how we've been using a resource group all the way along? Well, there's a function called delete resource group. So I can go back into the portal here and then click on resource groups, transactional replication, delete resource group. Then you actually have to type into the full name of the resource group. Okay. I didn't like it. I didn't. Transactional replication. There. Okay. Delete. And then deleting resource group transactional replication. I will pause it. I will first start the clock. Actually, I'll start the clock and then I'll pause it until it completes. Okay, ta-da! Right around 5 minutes to delete everything. I go back over to resource group and no more transactional replication. Thanks for watching this tutorial on how to set up transactional replication from SQL Server on an Azure VM to Azure SQL Database. Just to recap, we deployed a SQL Server on an Azure VM. Then we set up transactional replication using that as a publisher and a distributor. We created Azure SQL Database, used that as a subscriber, and then we set up a user that allowed us to authenticate from Excel. Again, you can find me on CPA and Business Intelligence at LinkedIn. I love to get connection requests and questions. Always happy to help. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube, and you can also find me on Tableau Public. So again, thank you for watching.